So for today's Wayfinder, we are having a doctor from the health sciences, Dr. Riaan van Wyk. He will be presenting on AI as a support tool for clinical simulation-based teaching and learning. Dr. Riaan van Wyk obtained his BCom IT degree at the University of the Free State in 2001, and he joined the private sector as an IT systems engineer. In 2012, he was offered the opportunity to help launch the new simulation unit at the Faculty of Health Sciences, and he began his involvement in higher education. His primary responsibilities were to successfully implement and utilize high technology simulators in this new unit. In 2021, he obtained his PhD in health professions education, focusing on an integrated system approach to high technology clinical simulation. He is currently the chief technical expert at the Clinical Simulation and Skills Unit here at the UFS. So yes, Dr. Riaan would be the one presenting for us, and yes, he's the person that I just introduced now. I just want to highlight that for any questions that we have, you can just write them on the comment section, and then after the presentation, Dr. Riaan will then answer the questions accordingly. So without speaking for a long time, I would love to hand over the session to Dr. Riaan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sipi. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for joining me. I just quickly want to share my presentation with you. So basically, I want to explain to you a little bit about how we envision of using AI tools within our department here at the Clinical Simulation and Skills Unit. And with that in mind, I just want to give you a brief overview. I saw some of the colleagues might not be that versed in what we do, but basically we are a clinical simulation unit, and we provide simulation facilities and expertise to primarily the medical students. So as a background, so simulation is a technique that creates a simulated environment, and it represents the real world, and that is for our students to practice and learn and be assessed in certain instances. It's an educational technique, so obviously we focus a lot on educational principles and so on. And as I said, we use it for training and assessment. So if we think about the typical journey of a medical student, they will start with theory. So that will be in their first year and a half, usually, to 2 years. And then after that, they will start with basic skills. So that is where we start to get involved with their journey. So that will be something like history taking, examining a patient, or procedural training. And then that evolves into team training, where we look at collaboration. So our units are basically responsible for those part of the training. Once the students move onto the clinical platform, there's where they will see real patients. So that will happen in the clinics and the hospitals and so on. And at that stage, we are not directly involved, but they can come back and practice certain skills if they feel they lack certain things and so on. So our unit basically provides basic skills, procedural training, and team training. Just a little bit of organizational background. So in our faculty, we've got various schools. So our unit is not a clinical department. We are a service department that assists with the clinical department. We are in the School of Biomedical Sciences. So primarily the School of Clinical Medicine, those are the medical students, so they are our main customers. From time to time, we will also help out nursing with their simulations, although they do have a similar unit in nursing that primarily helps them out. And then also for the School of Health and Rehabilitation, we also provide certain facilities. There are some of their simulations that they prefer to run in our unit simply because we have some dedicated equipment, so we don't need to duplicate that equipment. So when you think about simulation experience of the students, we obviously, from an educational point of view, need to start with outcomes. What do the department needs from a fourth year student in the module? And then from that, we can pretty much decide, okay, will this be a scenario? Will it be a class? Will it be an online presentation? And obviously, if it's a simulated related thing, we will become involved and help them out with that. Then we will plan and develop that scenario with the clinical people. Then we have our interaction with the students. We try to avoid unnecessary distractions. I'll speak a little bit about that later, but basically we need to keep these interactions as simple as possible to get to the particular outcome. So if we summarize that, we're looking at planning, designing, and setup. So the first three there basically happens before the simulation experience. And then on the day of the simulation, we will have a pre-briefing with the students, the actual simulation, and then very importantly, the debriefing part of it. So with the debriefing, it's a bit different than just a lecture. We want the students to basically decide amongst themselves what they've learned. So it's a collaborative, facilitated session where they can reflect on what just happened and what can they do better, where it went well, and those kind of things. So we facilitate it, but we don't want it to be turned into a lecture as such. So when we start planning with this, again, very, very important, our outcomes. I always joke and say we've got lots of nice toys here, and they can do lots of things, but we need to stick with what we need to train our students. This is just an idea to give you what our rooms might look like. So depending on our outcomes, we might have an ICU simulation. Then the room will look different from a delivery simulation or for a pediatric simulation. So all these rooms obviously also need physical setup. So if you want to take a look at the successful scenario, as I said, it needs to be clean and concise, and we need to stick to our outcomes. And we don't want to oversaturate our simulations with too many outcomes. Otherwise, it becomes convoluted, and especially the younger students get really stuck on some principles, and then we don't achieve our goals. It needs to be objective-driven, get the intended outcome. There's a critical action checklist. So within that outcomes, we always look at things like safety in all our simulations. Did they inject the correct drug? Did they do anything that will potentially harm the patient? Then obviously the simulation setup is very important, the physical room, what type of equipment is needed, what's the narrative of the case, and the scenario flow diagram with branch points. So especially with the high technology simulators, we can pre-program them for certain things to happen automatically, and we need to make sure those are correct. So the simulator doesn't start doing things that we didn't plan on doing and then just confuse or crash our simulation. And then obviously we need our instruction notes to facilitate the debriefing afterwards. With that in mind, we also need the debriefing plan. I'll show you some examples of that a little bit later. See, this thing is not jumping to the next slide for some reason. There we go. So as I mentioned, we've got the high fidelity simulators, and they do need some form of IT interaction and programming. Then we can also do hybrid simulation. So not everything in simulation is plastic mannequins. We can also use real patients to play actors. In those cases, we call those people SPs, or simulated patients. We can also mix and match between the high technology simulators and real persons. So, for example, in this, one of the outcomes, it was a delivery scenario, and one of the outcomes we want to see how the students um, uh, act towards a difficult family member in the room, for example, a husband that's nervous or things like that. So that was a secondary outcome. So for that role, we needed a real person, and for the delivery part, we had the plastic mannequin. And then and also not only the mannequin and the people, but also the actual room setup. What equipment is needed? Will there be defib? Do you need an anesthesia machine? If there's a delivery, what do we have a delivery bed, for example? If we need moulage or makeup for a wound, as you can see on the left-hand side, we need to make sure that is set up correctly. So for the scenario development framework, we need a lot of, as you can see, it's a lot of moving parts. We have the educational things, we have the technical things, the physical rooms that needs to be set up. And this is a multidisciplinary approach that we have towards it. So we need to make sure that the clinical side of it is correct, the educational side of it is correct, and also the physical, the fidelity, and all those kind of things, the room setup. So as you can imagine, this is not something that we can just always do in isolation. We need to work in teams. So we need to go through the equipment checklist. What's the patient profile looking like? What's setting the scene? We need to outline the trends for the simulator, and then obviously the debriefing overview, which is very important. So, for example, this is an example of the algorithm that we might use for a heart attack. So, at the first, on the top left, you will have what's this patient looking like at the start of the scenario. And then after a 30-second countdown, he will go into a VF. So then we want to see the students, okay, they will recognize the VF, they need to shock the patient. Then what happens after the shock? Okay, the patient will still be in VF. We want to see them do a second shock. Then maybe the patient move to a different state. And then we have success, hopefully at the end of some CPR and so on. So this is just a very simple example of what we need to program in some cases. Another example, this was for OTs where they need to be cognizant of how visual impaired patients perceive the world. So one of the objectives was to experience different visual conditions and to develop coping strategies on rehabilitation for these patients. So we have glasses. Each glass will have a different simulated eye condition. We will give the students, so one student will have nearsightedness, another one will be maybe totally blind. And then part of the simulation is they need to make a sandwich and tea and coffee, just to give them an idea of how the patients will go about their day-to-day living with this eye condition. So all of these things needs to be considered. And as I said, I mean, this is always a team thing, and there's a lot of moving parts. So our challenge at the moment, and we kind of looked as we start using AI in our department, our students don't have assignments that they need to give in or anything like that. I mean, they physically come to our unit, they are physically busy, they're being observed. So in terms of AI, it's very difficult for our students in simulation to really use AI. They might be able to use it a little bit in their preparation, but once they're in the unit, and also with our assessment, they literally need to be in a room, maybe intubating a patient. We have a checklist. So our worry or our concern is not as much as our student will use AI to do assignments, because the assignments is literally before our eyes. It's a very practical thing. And as a department, we started discussing where can AI help us in our day-to-day task. And with this scenario development being so relatively complex, we decided maybe we can have a look at the administration on the administration side. So one of our challenges is the fact that our simulation staff, not all of them are necessarily clinical experts. For example, my background is IT. I'm not a medical doctor. And then obviously the clinical staff, they are not always simulation experts. So they might not have the nuances of what's happening all in the background to make this simulation of them successful and so on. And because of this, it is quite challenging to create even a simple scenario, because you really need time to sit together and decide, okay, what's your outcome? And even from that, okay, what's your core outcome? Because it can become very convoluted very fast. So it requires interdisciplinary collaboration to create these scenarios. And as I mentioned earlier with the organogram, we're not even in the same school, never mind the same department. It takes quite a while to develop these scenarios, and the practical reality is the clinical guys are not always in their offices. I mean, they're literally in the hospitals with students or with patients. And it's extremely difficult to have 2 or 3 hours where we can sit together and develop the scenario. So over the years, we kind of developed these scenarios asynchronous through emails back and forth. I have some ideas, they have some outcomes, and it takes quite a long while. And if I send them blank templates, it can be quite intimidating for them to start this from scratch. So I started looking into using ChatGPT to help out with this. So I'll go to the example now, but it basically allows me to become for a moment at least, a semi-expert in their clinical environment. And then I can have a short discussion with a clinical expert. They can briefly explain to me what their ideas and outcomes are, and I can take that to ChatGPT and develop pretty much 75 to 85% of their data for them. Basically send that to them instead of a blank template, and then they can just basically look over it and decide, okay, well, this particular drug, we don't use that in Pelanomi, we have a different one. The patient vitals over here, I don't really like this one, let's change it a little bit. So it cuts down a lot of time because I can send them more explicit details on the potential scenarios. I'm just going to share my other screen here. So, as an example, I had a very quick discussion at some point with my anesthesia colleague at their department, and they have the need to teach the fifth-year students some basic medical emergency that might happen under anesthesia. And one of the emergency they mentioned specifically were a bronchospasm that they from time to time see, and the students struggle to handle that. So they need to make sure they can practice that. So instead of us sitting now together for 2-3 hours laying out, I can go to ChatGPT and ask him basically, please provide me with a layout for a clinical simulation experience for undergrad medical students. The outcome is to handle typical emergency that might occur under general anesthesia. So the output then from ChatGPT give me a little bit of an outline, especially, and also what type of typical emergency might arise. So now I know, okay, airway obstruction, difficult ventilation, anaphylaxis or allergic reaction might be one of them that we can look at. So I can send off this detail off to them. I can also see now immediately, okay, we're going to introduction, orientation, preparation phase, how long it's going to take, and then we can start planning in terms of scheduling. Okay, so if you want this emergency, the emergency itself might be 20 minutes. If you have 3 groups, we're going to look at 60 minutes, the debriefing time. So we pretty much need to set out maybe 3 to 4 hours each time you want to come and run this scenario with a couple of students. So that also gives us a better idea of what to expect in terms of our scheduling. So taking this a little bit further, so this is pretty much just a general approach then, just to give us a good idea of what's going to happen. Then I started to become more specific. Now I obviously know one of the ones I want to start off just to make sure everything is working is the bronchospasm one. So I can now start asking specific questions about bronchospasm under general anesthesia, and now we have vital signs, which obviously from my background, I would never know exactly what these things look like. But now with these vital signs, I have a very good platform to send them something, and they can just say, yes, okay, let's go with 100. The BP will be stable. Let's start with 135 over 95, for example. And then there's an induction phase, the maintenance phase. So actually, during the maintenance phase, the bronchospasm will start to occur, and then we can quickly discuss, okay, it will occur because of an anaphylactic reaction or whatever. So again, it's not like the clinical expert now needs to sit with a blank piece of paper and write this thing from scratch. They can pretty much just change whatever they would want to change and feel a bit more comfortable with. So now I want to be a bit more, I need to know what I need in the room for preparation, and I need to get the drugs ready and so on. So now I would ask, please add what typical drugs and dosages would be used at each stage. So now I start getting the exact drugs that we need to be ready and labeled in the simulation unit for them. And again, once the bronchospasm phase starts, what do they need to medicate that? So immediately, again, the clinical person then can quickly send back and say, but for example, we don't call it epinephrine in South Africa, it's adrenaline, or this drug might not be available in Palanomia and Universitas, we rather use something else. So then we make small changes to the ChatGPT output, and then we finalize the scenario. Then some of the feedback that we receive might be that, okay, but we don't want general anesthesia, but rather a rapid sequence induction, because it might be a patient that we haven't, that wasn't in hospital, and we're not sure what they ate. So let's make it rapid sequence induction. So then I said, okay, please repeat this, but instead of general anesthesia, change it for me to rapid sequence induction. So now I see, okay, there's some other things that I need to have ready in the room, and some other drugs to have in the room for the rapid sequence induction. And then they also added some things that we need to look out for. So, for example, cricoid pressure, one of the outcomes might be, was the intubation done correctly? And one of that was cricoid pressure applied by one of the students. So immediately we're starting to get a checklist of what we need to look at, and not just general big outcomes. So now I want to expand a little bit on what do I need to tell my students beforehand, to prepare them for this simulation. Generally, we have two parts of what we call the pre-briefing. One part will be me explaining, especially if it's the very first time the students use a specific mannequin, I will show them where they can feel for pulses. Basically, what's the difference between the mannequin and a real person that they might expect. If they need to do interventions, where can they cut the mannequin, for example, if that's one of the functions. Can they inject the mannequin with drugs? Where do they inject that drugs? And all those kind of things. And then the clinical staff or the lecturer will give the clinical overview of the simulation. So basically just briefly explain to them, okay, this is patient XYZ. This is the history. We expect this from you guys. And then those are the two aspects of the pre-briefing. So just to get a bit more structure on that, I asked ChatGPT to expand on the pre-briefing activities. And again, I can now see, okay, for example, orientation to SimMan. My students, I mean, I know the students are fifth year, they've used SimMan now for 2 years. I'm not going to need 30 minutes to orientate them. I'll just remind them of a few things, so it won't take more than 5 minutes, for example. Scenario overview might be a different scenario, so they just need some more minutes on that. Again, just the logistic and safety, where is what, how do they use the anesthesia machine now? Might the anesthesia machine look a bit different because it's connected now to a simulator, not a real person? And if they have any questions and so on. So following up on that, we also want to give the students a little door instruction. So just before they enter the room, just a brief summary of what to expect and so on. So now I asked ChatGPT to write the door instructions for the students, and this is a very generic door instruction. So ensure you're mentally prepared for immersive learning experience, etc. And I mean, we looked at this, and I mean, this is not really the type of door instructions that we give our students, but I'll think about the door instructions and I'll ask ChatGPT maybe later to give that to me. So with regards to the debriefing, I want to enable our lecturers to have a bit more structure in the debriefing phase of the scenario. Because as I said, the debriefing is very important. We want the students to explore what happens during the simulation. We do not want it to evolve or devolve into a lecture session again. Before they come to simulations, they have their lecture, they have their theory. So this just helps to orientate our lecturers again. Pretty much what's the difference between being a lecturer and being a facilitator for a debriefing, because there's definitely a difference. Basically, things like create a safe learning environment, review the outcomes, encourage reflection, all those kind of general things. Then I can also give them some proper feedback, proper advice on how to use the OSAT approach. It's one of the approaches that we can use during debriefing. It's objective setting, it's much more structured. It's either for assessment or performance, and what's the feedback on the delivery. And now ChatGPT give me some nice pointers just to summarize again, so that the lecturer can have this either in the room or at the back of their mind as they guide this reflective discussions by the students. I still wasn't too happy with the door instructions. So I decided to ask ChatGPT a bit more explicit to write a short clinical overview of the simulated patient for the students without giving away that it will develop into a bronchospasm. So our students know they're going to handle emergencies, but they do not know which one they will be able to should handle. So now suddenly my door instruction that I get from ChatGPT looks a lot closer to the ones we are used to. So it's Mr. Smith, 50-year-old male patient, what the procedure will be, what the history is. So it's a smoker, 20-pack year smoker history, all those kind of things. So this is all the typical clinical history that we will give our students as part of a door instruction. So I'm much more happy with this door instruction to send that on to the clinical people and just make sure, okay, is this correct? Can we go with this? And if they want to change anything, they don't have to write the door instruction from scratch. I'm just going to go back again to my presentation. So what I hope to achieve with this new approach is the process of writing the scenario across disciplines, across departments, across different schedules and roster is still complex. But with the help of AI, we could reduce the amount of work that we need to generate from scratch each time, because it's much faster for experts to just check and adapt rather than develop everything from scratch each time. It's still the asynchronous process where I do a little bit of on my side, they change it and make it a little better. But at least the the quality that I can give them is much closer to the real thing than I can do from my IT background. Um, and what I've seen in this approach is that the expert human intervention is still very important. Uh, so far from what I've seen, we can't just solely rely on the AI. It helps to reduce the work quite a lot, but there's still some mistakes that's made. There's just general roster things that the way we do things generally is a bit different sometimes, so we can change that. And then important thing that I found is that I think this approach don't need to be only applied for clinical or health disciplines. I think this approach could help in other disciplines. I'm helping out Cornell at the library. They're looking at communication training for their staff, and we talked about, well, we use simulation quite extensively to train the medical students in communications, specifically for history taking exams, all those kind of things. So we could theoretically apply the principles that we know in clinical simulation to apply to general simulation, and maybe have some kind of role play experiences for their staff to enhance their communication. So I think that's one example of where you can do simulation outside the clinical sphere. Um, so for us, being a support service department, without students, as I said, giving in assignments and things like that, our focus is more on the administration side. Um, and for us, we hope this approach will enhance our productivity. And that is pretty much that from my side.
Wow, this was interesting.
Hercules?
Yes, Hercules is a question.
No, thank you so much. This was really informative and very interesting. As with all of the Wayfinder series and with all of the work that happens, I've got a lot of different questions. And this actually feeds into so many things. So I just have three overarching questions, which potentially could branch into a multitude of other things.
Mm.
The first question, we have some colleagues in here from a human language technology project that we're running with the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. Um, we don't have a lot of success with translating sign language into text. So that's a problem. That's a big, very big problem that you need quite a large amount of resources for. You need an entire army of Google engineers to fix that. But what we're having a lot more success with is to be able to do speech to text, text to avatar, and avatar to sign language. So instead of a clinician being able to understand the patient, the clinician can ask the patient, can you point me where the pain is? Can you show me where the problem is? And I'm specifically thinking in the form of a crisis or an emergency if you have a deaf individual that undergoes a car accident and they're somewhat conscious. So my first question is, would such simulations be possible within your unit? So let's say we develop the technology somehow and we roll it out. I know the curriculum is really full, but is there a way in which one could potentially test this in the simulation unit? That's my first question.
I think, yeah. I mean, again, just looking from the logistical point of view, I mean, that will pretty much depend on how busy we are and the scheduling thing. Um, and obviously what equipment needs to, but we're always open for cross collaborative research and projects like this. Um, so I know we are looking into um, uh, uh, getting some more simulation space at the faculty, specifically geared towards postgrad simulations, more specialized simulations. Our focus here is mostly on the undergrad medical students. Um, but if it's something that simulate where we simulate real world scenarios, whether it's medical or not, then we're open for collaboration. So I don't see a problem with that. The only thing is just closer to the time, the logistics.
Yeah, no, of course. Thank you. The second question I have, which hits different academics in a different way, is around the domain knowledge that the language models have. So, just so that all of us are on the same page, these models were trained from a large amount of data. So, some fields are more represented than others. So, for example, I know in healthcare, you could find really accurate anatomical and physiological and biochemical information, quite accurate, because the
Yeah.
corpus or the basis from which the models were built were really good. But in other domains, like for example, um, neoliberalism in Pan-African contexts, you might not necessarily have that much domain knowledge. So have you come across instances where the large language models knowledge, domain knowledge, was insufficient?
um, I think because our focus is obviously medical and undergrad, so it's not very specific. I think if you move towards more very specific postgrad things, it might start lacking. Um, but that's why I also say, I mean, at this stage at least, we double check everything. I think that in general, and I know it's not completely answering your question, but I found that the role of experts is probably going to become more important as we move towards AI, because they will initially at least have to be some kind of check that what this is giving us is actually correct. Because I've started when I speak, I've got a second year research group, and these guys are obviously very novice. We starting to teach them these things, and they kind of still in this mode of, okay, I found something on the internet, so it's true. So I found something on AI, so it's true. There's no cross check, there's no check of the references, and so on. I think as AI evolve, it will hopefully become better. But as you said, I mean, it gets populated by the world data. So if the world data is skewed towards a certain paradigm, your AI will be skewed towards that paradigm. And I think that might be a problem for us, especially from a Pan-African perspective. You don't want to lose your voice, your perspective, and just become a general Western-based uh, vehicle, because 80% of the data generated on the internet is maybe from the West, or whatever the case might be. But in short, I mean, from a simulation point of view, I mean, we mostly looking at the educational things. The clinical guys look at the clinical things, and together we kind of design this. So we make sure, okay, the educational principles are sound. They make sure the clinical things are sound, and then we present this. And for that, again, I mean, we double check everything, and we want to change things, and so on. So I've never had a big issue with AI, but I've never used AI's result just like that. That's pretty much it.
No, thank you so much. And then my third question, which you briefly touched on during your presentation, this makes you implicitly an expert in prompt engineering because you're learning how to communicate with these models more effectively. I can
Yeah,
imagine the way in which you're communicating with these models now is
yeah,
vastly different to how it was when you started this
yeah,
journey.
yeah.
Um, we are involved with performing a lot of different sandbox experiments with staff, and we've come across this because we use these models very, very regularly. What advice would you give to anyone who doesn't really use large language models that often to sort of become better at using it and critically using it? I think that's the question. So what advice would you have?
Yeah, I think, my advice would be purely from my experience. I mean, I almost see it in the way that when I talk to somebody and I start to realize, listen, this person isn't understanding, I'm not coming across the way I need to, then I rephrase the question and so on. And it's almost the same with AI. For example, that's why I left that door instruction thing, because when we talk amongst each other and we talked about the door instruction for a simulation, that's everybody understands that's what I want. But the moment I give it to ChatGPT, it understands something different, and then I need to critically check okay, but if I tell a 6-year-old what I need, this will probably be what they give me. So I need to be a bit more explicit. So I mean, every question I kind of you as you said, I mean, you need to reflect critically on the answer that you got, and then you need to decide, okay, where's the gaps, and that gap gets plugged by evolving your question. Sometimes I think shorter questions most likely is a bit better. But again, I mean, you start off with what you want, just in general, and then you say, okay, but this guy doesn't understood me correctly, and you kind of drill down. Okay, let's take this part out, and we only ask about that part, and so on. So for me, that's kind of how my communication with AI evolved over the last year or so.
Thank you so much. I not to throw it out there too much, but Zeti said something incredible, and Janine as well. I mean, talking to a large language model is in and of itself a skill, and that's something that we've learned. Okay, now thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. So I just want to go through the questions for chat here. Yeah, I think that's a good approach about asking it in terms of a simulation, because then obviously in terms of the data that's generated out there, your model will not only look at the clinical things, but maybe also on the educational things. Yeah, exactly. I can't stress it too, but I mean, every time I use AI, I just realize again how important it is to critically reflect and look with an expert eye on these things. Yeah, sorry, Janine, I saw you are struggling with ChatGPT giving you wrong answers. But again, I mean, if you are a first-year student, you might not realize it's wrong. And I think that is one of the big things with AI at the moment. We need to teach our students and our users that you just can't use it at face value. Any other questions? There's something that I think one of the things that I want to bring across as well is that I think as we start talking about AI, or been talking about AI, obviously from a teaching and learning perspective, we look a lot at what's the impact on our students, how do it impact our academia, how do it impact our assessment. But for me, being more into the support service role, I was kind of wondering, how will this impact potentially our administration at the university or in your department? Just something, I mean, this is totally out of my scope. I'm not even sure at what speed this will be possible. But if we look at all the complex processes and SOPs at the university, could we potentially use AI in 5 years' time? And you have an AI chatbot on your computer, and you pretty much just tell it, listen, send me the template, the branded approved template for a academic event I want to advertise, or what's the latest process of getting my staff member a promotion, or and then it just featured the impact. Or you can even go as far as I need to order 6 batteries from the general store. Can you sort that out without having to go into every different system that we've got on the intranet at the moment? So I think, as exciting as AI is on the teaching and learning end, I think on the administration and support side of things, it could also be very excited if we start thinking about how can it improve our internal processes at the university. Any other thoughts or suggestions? So it's my yes.
I just have one sort of general follow-up on all of this. As again, you highlighted the importance of a lot of things. My concern always, from both a student and a staff perspective, is that people become very over-reliant and not really understand the I always want to say the garbage intelligence that goes in. You almost need to prompt properly. One thing that we've learned is that we don't know how to effectively communicate as people. And you see this through a large language model. If you ask the large language model to do something and it doesn't actually do what you ask it, is that a fault of the large language model, not comprehending, or is that a fault of your poor instructions? And more often than not, it's the latter. It's the fact that we don't know how to effectively communicate. But now let's say you have effectively communicated and now you know how to streamline your communication. To what extent does people become over-reliant? We see this with our undergrad students, especially our first and second years. They don't know that if you just Google something, it's not a fact. They're not critical readers. So my biggest call to action is always that we're now entering a stage, not so much of critical thinking, but more critical reading. So being able to assess what is fake, what is real, and so on. My question as a follow-up on that is, what and how would one prepare our students and our staff for this kind of a future? Because obviously there's a lot of upskilling that is needed.
I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, we talk a lot about critical reading skills of our students. For our point of view, not necessarily for AI, but I mean, just giving them a general question in an exam, just to see what their clinical reasoning is. And we found that the critical reading skills are sometimes lacking. And I'm not sure if it's something that you can address at secondary school level before they come to university. I'm obviously not an expert on what happens in school and so on, and sometimes it feels like I think maybe here it's a little bit different at the med school, but there's, especially in first year, they kind of have still this thing about I'm a school learner, and everything will be spoon fed to me, and when it's fed to me by AI or by Google, it's simply correct. And to be honest, I don't have the answer for you, but it's definitely an issue that needs addressing. I think it will improve your quality of researcher, of student, on the academics, on the teaching and learning side, and on the research side.
Thank you so much.
The other hand was mine.
Yeah, sorry, I was just about.
Yes, I'm going to put two people on the spot here, Ms. Zeti Venter and Dr. Jan Blomeris. I see in the comments here we have a really nice conversation going on. So I would love to first give Ms. Zeti Venter to just come forward and just, give her opinion based on the comments that she has been writing, if she doesn't mind. And then afterwards, I also see that Dr. Jan, he mentioned that he did try AI and it gives within the medical and it gives like 50% of the answers. So I think also there's a bit more to that, but just 2 minutes for each of them to just hear what they have to say. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, this is very interesting to me because actually I know nothing about AI, but I've been trying these chatbots and I've also been getting the wrong answers. And then, Riaan, what you've been saying and what I've listened between the lines now, and if you don't ask the question, or if you don't frame the question correctly, or from a certain perspective, then you will get answers that that distract you, or that brings you down the wrong line. So I think, yeah, and the critical reading thing is a thing. So if you don't read critically, and if you're not trying to ask the question in a specific way. So in other words, if you don't understand the language of the bot, you won't get the answer that
Yeah.
you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, for me in our situation, I mean, as I said, with if you forget about AI for a moment, I mean, developing these scenarios, and it might obviously be different in your domain. For us, it's always a team sport, and not all team members are in the same department, and so on. So the way I see AI, in this case, it will be ChatGPT, or it might be in a different product. It is just another member of that team. He's not the only member of the team. So he's a team member that can write really fast. And that's pretty much it. So you still need, I mean, in this case, it was anesthesia. I see Janine is on the call. So this will be, generally, it will be a discussion between Janine and myself over the course of weeks to develop this scenario, because our schedules simply don't sync up always. But now we've got a third team member to write the scenario that can help, but everything that it says isn't true. So you still have Janine to double check the anesthesia part of it. You still have me to double check the educational simulation part of it. So that's again, I think we should, at least at this stage, maybe in 5 years it will be different.
Yeah.
But at this stage, we should stay away of taking AI answers at face value.
Yeah.
But as Herkula said, maybe it's because we ask the incorrect answers. But even I mean, at some stage, we need to create a product. So I can't sit with AI for evenings and evenings doing this. I need to get the scenario sorted out to sort it out of the students.
Yes. I agree 100% with what you are
that's
doing, and I think what you are doing is wonderful. So you mustn't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm saying what you are doing is wonderful, and I have admiration for what you are doing. And I think what you are doing is you are using it in a great way. So I agree 100% in the way that you are using AI. Yes,
thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Jan. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I agree with everything that Dr. Riaan said. I'll just give some background. I started with ChatGPT when I heard it on the radio in January 2024. And since then, I've used it quite a lot. In my field, I'm also able to get the same answers than Dr. Riaan is able to get in medicine. But when I ask it medicine questions, it is giving me different answers, and it could be perhaps because I know nothing about medicine and it's picking up that I know nothing, and it doesn't want to give me any details. But I have been able in my field, when I critical read what it's saying, and I pick up the errors, to you must be able to adjust your question to make it more clear. So yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I just want to say it's nice that you're using it, Dr. Riaan.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Dr. Riaan, I just want to say that this is actually a very wonderful presentation because I think it can also give an idea to other lecturers out there who are having practicals sessions, how they can use AI to prepare for the lessons and how they can do the pre-briefing with the students, my question is, I know you have touched a little bit on this, but in a nutshell, as someone who has used AI for your simulation-based learning, what are the things that you have mastered so far when you set the questions? Do you have like quick tips that you can share here and there? Or is it just a matter of understanding, like being a master at what you do?
Yeah, well, I don't think you necessarily need to be a master at what you do, but you need to have some level of insight to at least, again, I mean, and Jan also touched on this. I mean, you need to be able to, at least to critically reflect on what the answer is and then adjust your questioning. And I think for me, the way I use it, I kind of start broad, and I know you're not going to get the answer in the first question. It's not a shortcut. It's more a discussion. So you kind of ask, you start broad. I want to create a simulation for anesthesia students, and that's broad to the sense that it's almost nonsensical, and then you kind of narrow it down to what you actually, okay, now it's fifth years, okay, it's bronchospasm, what's your patient's age, what's your patient's weight, what's the drug I need to inject to get him to sleep, for example. So it's not a thing. I think sometimes, especially the students, maybe not us here, but kind of have this thing, okay, you ask one question, that's the answer, and that's what I'm run to for my assignment or whatever. But it's really a discussion, and then out that whole discussion, you might get one decent paragraph. It's almost like any research. I mean, you have literature study, you read a lot of things you throw away, and in the end you sit with 3 sentences. So it's almost, I think, yes, it's AI, and it's obviously very much different. But in terms of how I interact with it, I still use your principles of how would you interact with literature, how would you interact with Google results. So you kind of treat it in that way. It's just a different platform to that extent.
Okay, no, thank you for explaining it like that. I'm going to call one last person to put them on the stand. It's Mr. George Miller. I see that they are typing, but if they don't mind, they can also just come forward, use the mic, and they can directly ask the question.
Thank you so much. I tried to prevent that part. Riaan, thank you so much for this information. It really helps. And I just want to, like a general comment from all the comments I saw, is one thing I found, especially with your AI models, if you provide them context regarding your question, the AI model has a particular frame of reference on where to search for the results that they need to give. And from what I found is the better the context or the background that you give, the more you exclude in what we call an AI hallucination, where they make up a fact and present it as true. From a prompt engineering point, it really helps the AI model to understand what context you're providing and what feedback to provide. So yes, that's just all I wanted to say.
Yes, exactly. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Doctor. Yes, I don't know if there is anyone else who wants to come forward, or is this everything? Because I also see there's still a bit of typing as well. Miss Celia Furi, I don't know if you would like to come forward. I promise you are the last person I'm calling to come speak, just to give your opinion if you would like.
No, that's why I was typing. I didn't want to speak, but Riaan, I just want to say thank you. This was very insightful, especially for me also working in simulation. I think it will make life real easier. And especially also the admin part. Yo, I've never thought about that. So thank you so much, Riaan. It was very, very good.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Riaan. If we have no questions, I think that would be the end of this week's Wayfinder. And thank you so much for availing yourself to share this wonderful information with us. This was actually a very nice presentation. So
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
thank